Well, today will be a disappointment if you are an enthusiast for end time studies and uh, eschatological thought and theology, because I'm going to touch on a piece of that whole thing of the end of the world and when and how and all of that. But I'm only going to touch on it because I am not an authority. I hope you won't lose regard for me when I admit that when I study the end times, I don't get more enlightened. I get more confused. I don't know why that is. Um, but what this is, I'll tell you what I think about myself, and you can think of whatever you want to. But for me, I don't see that as a huge problem. It's not a problem to my faith. I I have kind of boiled it down to the simplest kind of thought and ideas, because that's really about all I can handle is the simple. Uh, I'm told there are a number of different ways to look at the return of Christ, the end of time, the end of the world, the judgment, and that whole thing. Are people who are premillennialists who believe that Jesus will return, and these people are generally the folks who advocate a rapture where there will be this translation, this leaving of the saved out of the tribulation of the world. These are called pre-trib, millennialists. There are others who are post-trib, who believe that the church will be left for the tribulation. But essentially what they believe is there will be, after the church is taken away, there will be 1,000-year reign of Christ. And this 1,000-year reign is specifically talked about in the book of Revelation. The difficulty for me is, as I read Revelation, it's pretty hard to pull apart the literal from the symbolic. The book of Revelation is highly symbolic in its language and style. That's me. There are people who are millennialists. Man, that word didn't usually give me trouble. Millennialists. They believe that the millennium is immaterial. And that we're pre folks see all kinds of signs. They look for the fulfillment of their interpretation of prophecy from the Old and the New Testaments, and as they see it, they're the ones who are usually bugling, we're in the end times. All of these things are aligning. Millennialists, not so much. They look at the world and history and say it's cycling, and at some point Jesus will return. Okay, and then there are post-millennialists. These are people who believe the millennium has already happened. There aren't very many of those. One of the things I read regarding this said that after World War I, when the world was convinced this was the war to end all wars and the beginning of the millennium, then World War II happened, and that idea kind of perished. I suppose there probably are still some post-tribs. I don't know. I tend to be a pro-millennialist, okay? I just want it to happen. I believe Jesus is going to return, and I believe my function, my role, my objective is to have my heart prepared so that at any time when he returns, I'll be ready. why I'm telling you this is because what we're looking at today is in 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. We did the first part of that this last time. Dear children, this is the last hour. And as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come. This is how we know it is the last hour. Now, the Antichrist, well, in the book of Revelation, John writes about Antichrist as a person, as a being. Interpreters of this have gone everywhere from a single person. You, I'm sure, probably already know that in the 1940s, Hitler was identified as the Antichrist. Since then, everybody from Nikita Khrushchev to Donald Trump have been identified as the Antichrist. Again, now I'm on the horns of that dilemma. How literally do I take what John wrote in the book of Revelation? Is it symbolic? Is it literal? Is there an individual that is the or will be the Antichrist? Or is that an attitude? Is that this anti-Christ? When you think about what does that mean? Against Christ, against Messiah, the enemy of Jesus. There have been many enemies of Jesus since his birth, beginning with Herod. It would be a very long list if you followed that through the 2020 years that we know of here between the birth of Christ and our current present situation. And John says there have been many antichrists that have come, many people who have come as the enemy or an enemy of Jesus. And I wonder if there will be one supreme enemy. Now, bear with me here. In one sense of the word, we already have who that is. That's Satan. There has never been any being, any entity who has ever been more against Christ than Satan himself. Again, in the book of Revelation, where John, the Christmas story in the book of Revelation is not nearly as sentimental and excuse me, beautiful as Matthew and Luke's. He talks about a woman who gives birth and has to flee because the dragon is coming to devour her and her child. The earth itself protects them. And this, now, if that's not symbolic, I'm really struggling to figure out how that could be literal. Okay, where am I going with all this? Well, Satan is the ultimate Antichrist. And he never stops working his agenda. He never stops recruiting souls into his flow, into his design. There will be many, there have been many, and there until the return of Jesus, if that's today, tomorrow, or far down the trail, until he returns, there will be many who set themselves up against Christ. And in fact, John says, hey, if you wondered why I'm thinking this is the last hour, it's because there's so many antichrists. Now, here's, I'm going to kind of come to the bottom line on this whole antichrist thing for myself. I don't know. I just don't know. For me, it remains a mystery. I do know this much. It doesn't mean because I don't understand it, I won't pay attention. No, absolutely not. You see, our enemy, our supreme enemy, the devil, is anti-Christ. And if I'm not alert to him, his ways, his methods, his intentions, I will be a victim. And there's no need for that. No need at all. By the way, This is not about, well, Jesus needs defenders in the world against the Antichrist. Really? We'll back up. The Jesus who willingly crawled onto the cross, accepted the nails in his hands and feet, died in agony, was buried in a borrowed tomb, and then rose from the dead with the keys of death and hell in his hands. So he needs protectors? Oh my, no. Don't think so. He needs representatives. I am his witness. Interesting thing about that word witness. Originally, it meant martyr. Wow, that's a scary thought. But to be his witness means I proclaim his reality. I proclaim his presence. How do I do that? For me, I'm not intellectual enough to give you all the intellectual and academic reasons why. The best I can do is express to you through the way I live, the words I use, the heart that I make vulnerable to people, that he is alive and at work in my life, and he has done for me, in me, and through me things I could never do on my own. The bottom line for me is I must be, if I'm going to be his witness, I have to be a walking, breathing, living billboard for grace. I used to sign off all my letters back in the day when we wrote letters as gladly a poster boy for God's grace. That's who I want to be. Now, John writes, we know that we're in the last time, the last hour, because the antichrists are here. And then he goes on in verse 19 and he says, but they went out from us. Interesting point. These antichrists, they had been a part of the family of God, the fellowship of the church. John, again, is he speaking allegorically, metaphorically, or is he speaking literally? They went out from us. Does he mean, hey, they were in our church? But they did not really belong to us. It's always been true, and it always will be true. God's church will always be populated with broken, imperfect, even sinful human beings, some of who will imitate a lifestyle of a follower of Christ without fully embracing it in their heart. Just is going to be that way. You and I, neither one of us get to judge them, although we do have to be aware. There are people, even in our midst, whose motives are not pure. And John said it was that way in his day. And then he goes on to say, for if they had belonged to us, they would have remained with us, but their going showed that none of them belonged to us. Now, where did they go and how did they go? We don't know for sure, but essentially we do know they broke away. They broke away from this established fellowship. And one of the ways that you can interpret that is in the bigger picture of the entire letter, one of the things that John was writing to address, at least, was the Gnosticism that was around. And Gnosticism, I mean, there are thick books describing and explaining Gnosticism. It basically comes down to the idea that there is spirit and there is flesh. Spirit is always good, flesh is always bad. Jesus, because he was always good, could not have come in the flesh. He only appeared to come in the flesh. And it seems stupid and ridiculous to us, pretty much because it is. But in the first century, it began to infect God's church. And I believe it's really possible that what John's talking about is those people went out because they exchanged the truth of who Jesus was for this mysterious Gnostic idea. All right. Is there an application there? I suppose for me, here's the application. Never lose sight of the real. Never turn loose of the real. The appeal of the mysterious, the appeal of the unexplainable, the appeal of what is trendy and popular. Be careful. You want the authentic. Where do you find that? You don't find it from my teaching. I hope I support what is there of it, but you find it in Scripture. So if you're not immersing yourself there, you're not going to figure it out. So there you go. See you next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.